Hello there, chess friends, and I'm doing a quick video here, basically to test out the a new microphone I got. I was tired of hearing the fan noise from the crappy microphone in my laptop, so hopefully this represents some sort of improvement on the audio in my other videos. And today's subject is going to be beating the Grob. Now, the Grob is a very annoying opening. If you've played it against black, then you may have had a bad experience about it. The odd thing is that it's universally derided as being a terrible opening. And yet, if you go to chessgames.com, you'll see that it has the actual highest winning ratio of any white opening. Of course, these are a lot of games by lower rated players and so on. It's not really played at the highest level very much, although there are a few people that do play it. Scrambris, I think is his name, Scrambris. It's a Greek master, has been playing it for quite some time with pretty good results. It's a very tricky opening, and I think one reason that black players do so poorly against it is because they've heard that the Grob is a bad opening, and they lick their chops thinking, okay, this is going to be a walk in the park. This opening sucks. But the fact is, the opening is filled with tons of traps, and there are many pitfalls that the unwary can fall into. So we want to avoid those, and this is what this video is all about. So first of all, I'm going to show you an example of what not to do against the Grob. This is the we'll call this a saliva variation, because this is what white players want you to play. So we'll do some moves here. 1 to g4, d5. Okay, so d5 is what white wants you to play, because he's going to get a lot of pressure down this long white diagonal, and d5 essentially is a target. So after bishop to g2, you'll note that he's giving up this pawn on g4, but not really. This is really only a temporary pawn sacrifice, because white will be able to regain it, and often with a good position. Okay, so the first point to note is after c4, which is what white will play, the pawn is pinned. So c takes d4 is refuted by bishop takes b7. Now there is a trappy counterattack that black can organize based on giving up his rook in the corner, but we don't want to go into that. Okay, we don't want to learn a lot of theoretical tactical lines in order to beat the Grob. So we won't even talk about that. This is actually the second video I've done. The first one, the video got messed up, so I'm redoing this. In the first one, I pointed out that there are probably many ways to get an advantage against the Grob, but we want to take the simplest one, and playing d5 and so on is not the simplest way to go. As Claude Bloodgood pointed out in his influential book, The Tactical Grob, not only can black not win the second pawn here by c takes d, but he must defend the d pawn even though it cannot be held. Otherwise, he risks falling into a losing position. Kind of an odd psychological state for black to find himself in, to defend a pawn that cannot be defended. Okay, so a typical line here might be something like c6, and white will take off. And now black has a choice of lines, but say he does something fairly normal looking, like recapturing. Then queen to b3 comes, and you can see there's a double attack against the d pawn, and from the queen and the bishop, and there's also an attack on b7. So already black is in a bad way, and one thing that he can do that he shouldn't do is e6 in this position, because queen a4 picks off the bishop, and this is only one of several traps, as I mentioned, that can occur in this position. Whoops, what happened? Well, where did I go wrong? Excuse me a second while I regain the position. Let's see. C takes d5. C takes d5. Bishop to b3. Okay, so supposing he doesn't make that horrendous error, supposing he tries to defend the b pawn with queen to c7. And then after knight c3, we're intensifying pressure on d5. Knight to f6, trying to defend, but we just take everything off on d5. And you'll note, again, we have a double attack against the pawn on f7 and also the pawn on b7. So something's got to give in this game that we're going to follow, which is Bloodgood Christie. He decides that he wants to hang on to his b-pawn and his rook, so he develops the knight. Bishop takes f7 check was played. King to d6. And, excuse me, I seem to have lost my glasses. Okay, well, hopefully we won't need them. F3, knight to f3. King to d7. Knight to g5, and this knight is going to be doing something useful in a minute here. Knight to d4. And I guess Black thought that he was doing well in this position. He's attacking e2 and the queen, and I'm sure he was probably doing a victory lap in his head, but Bloodgood came back after bishop to e2 with the rather shocking knight takes d4, based on the fact that if queen takes queen, then we have a knight to e6 check, recovering the queen with a winning position. So, okay, so this is just a brief example of what you should not do against the Grob. And, these are all natural moves you see that Black has made, but they lead to disaster. And this is why the Grob is so popular, because of variations like this. So, okay, so how do we deal with it? We want to deal with it in a relatively simple way. Okay, and so let's look at this game. This is Tim Wall versus Tim Upton, two strong British players. I believe Upton was rated somewhere below 2400, and I believe Wall was a master. This is London, 1984, Lloyd's Bank Open. So you've got to hand it to Wall for having the well, let's just say it, for having the balls to play 1g4 in a high-level tournament like this. But he gets his butt handed to him here. Let's switch everything around here from the Black perspective. Okay, so 1e5. Okay, so 1e5 is the move that white players do not want you to make. They want you to play 1d5. So their joy is tempered somewhat, even at this early stage. h3. Now, unlike the Bloodgood game that we looked at, Tim Wall seemed to be following Mike Basman's advice. Basman doesn't like the whole gambit of the g-pawn and so on. He likes to play a more positional approach, if one can indeed consider a positional approach possible in the Grob, since the position is bad to begin with. Okay, and here is the star move. So on move 2 for Black, knight to e7. Okay, and it's pretty clear what the positional motivation of this move is. If you'll note, the moves h3 and g4 have exposed rather gaping holes on the dark squares around White's king, namely at h4 and f4. And so this knight, given half the chance, will make the trip over to one of those two squares. So for instance, if next is bishop to g2, then knight g6, and it's hard to see how he can prevent either knight to h4 or knight to f4. For instance, if knight to f3, then knight to h4. If pawn to e3, then knight to h4. So he'll find one of those squares a nice cozy hideout. So in this game, after knight to e7, Wall decided to play d4, and I guess he probably saw what Black's plan was and decided that some central play might distract him from his goal. E takes d4, queen takes d4. I guess he didn't mind losing the tempo after knight to c6. Queen to a4. d5. Bishop to g2. Now, in contrast with the first game that we saw, white's pressure on this diagonal is not quite intense. For one thing, d5 is adequately defended. And secondly, the queen is on a4, not b3, so he doesn't have pressure against the b pawn as he normally does. So this is much better for black. Bishop to e6, knight to c3, still trying to go after the traditional target on d5. And now black plays a good move, d4. This is a multi-purpose move. Not only is he pushing white around, but he's also going to restrain e3 and opening lines for his bishop. So it's kind of a triple purpose move here. And I don't have Firebird running at the moment, but I do remember looking at this position, and Firebird considered black to have a clear advantage in this position. So knight to e4 was played, and now knight to d4, and excuse me, knight to d5, and he's on his way to f4. Knight to f3, just trying to get his pieces out, and now another strong move from black, bishop to b4. And the idea of this move is to either make the king move, or to induce an exchange of dark squared bishops. And when the dark squared bishops are gone, then the dark squares on f4 and h4 once again become prime targets for the knight on d5. So in this case, he decided he would give up the dark squares. Bishop to d takes d2, knight takes e2, knight f4, as threatened on move 2. Okay, so already white is having to scramble around, making unpleasant concessions. Rook to g1, castles, knight to b3, bishop to d5. Okay, and just a glance at the position shows you everything you need to know about why not to play the Grob. The king is stuck in the center for the time being. I suppose he can castle queenside. The rook is on an awkward square. He needs to be on an open file. That's not really an open file, and it doesn't really seem to have any kind of a near-term likelihood of being an open file. His bishop is neutralized by the knight. Black's got his bishop on the long diagonal. The white queen is out of play. The pawns are a little funny on h3 and g4, whereas black's pawn structure is pristine. And he's also maintaining this annoying pawn on d4, although perhaps not for long. So now at this point he could have recovered the pawn on d4 by knight b takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, knight to e2, king takes e2, bishop takes f3, and this uncovers an attack on the queen on d4, so king must defend. Queen to g5, which is a very good move. Bishop takes f3 was played, but you may wonder what would happen if king to c3, predicting the rook coming to the open file, and something like the following would have occurred. Rook to take, queen takes a7, queen to e5, check, king to b3, queen to b5, king to c3, bishop takes g2, rook takes g2, and queen to c6, check, picks up the rook on g2. So that line was a loser after bishop to d5. So he played king to f1 to reinforce the bishop. The rook to e8 was played, rook to e1, queen to f6, g5. Okay, and we can already see that if white is reduced to playing g5 in a position like this, things cannot be good. Queen to f5, and now, according to Martin, white had nothing better than the following line: knight takes b4, knight takes d4, excuse me, d4, queen takes d4, and now knight takes g2. And you'd have to admit that the white king position is really kind of something of a smoking ruin. Now, in the game, Upton played the inaccurate bishop to f3, and he went on to win a scrappy game. But it was he was always better, but he made it harder on himself than necessary with bishop takes f3, rook to ad to d8. Excuse me, my tongue seems to be malfunctioning. Was much more accurate with a likely continuation queen to c3, queen takes h3, and really black has a winning position here. White can safely resign. Firebird considers this completely won position. I don't think we need to go any further than this. So basically, in summary, we can say that after 1g4, play 1e5. Do not play d5. And regardless of what white plays on the second move, knight to e7 is the move you want to make. And remember, you're aiming for the weakened dark squares on f4 and h4. And also remember Upton's plan of exchanging the dark square bishops all fall into black's hands. So rather than remembering a lot of tactical lines, this gives you a positional idea of how to approach beating the Grob. I don't think there's a refutation of the Grob yet, but someday I think there will be. And in the meantime, I hope you win your games, and I'll look forward to seeing you on a future video sometime soon. Thanks for watching.